each one of you. At the outset, I must thank the Dean of CMR Law College. Professor has been very kind to me and asked me to be amongst you and share some knowledge about this particular topic, which is very important for you as you progress in your career. I also thank Vidya Madam for coordinating with me for making this happen. I do hope in the short time I have that I will touch on some aspects of this topic, which is very important not only for you, to the general public also, because considering the number of accident claims that occur and the number of vehicles that are plying on the roads, it is very common to find instances where you in your future career will be sitting as a presiding officer or advocate of one of the victims, trying to help them to get back into the society as a normal individual like you and me are. So the topic for today would be the guideline for assessment of compensations for physical disabilities in accident cases. So I don't need to talk about me again. So this is a very common theme all of us come across. You being part of the civil society would see this in person sometimes, or probably see over the television or in the newspapers. These scenes are so common in our society that we wonder what we can do to prevent this. But if it did occur, what can we do to make the people who have been injured to become a part of the mainstream? So it's very mind-boggling to note that as per the statistics that is there in the 2000, there were about 5 lakh accident cases in our country. Can you imagine 500,000 cases of accident in our country in one annual year? And about 1.5 lakh of them lost their precious lives. And about 5 lakh of them were injured to various extents. So this is the crux of the problem. But however, since 2000, it's very important, interesting to note that the amount of the roads that were added on to our network of roads was just about 39 to 40%. But the number of motor vehicles that were added on to this already congested roads increased by about 160%, nearly fourfold. You can imagine the stress, the number of vehicles that are... Sorry for the brief interruption. Interruptions sometimes make it very interesting. So, if you notice that the 67% of the accidents that occurred always take place between 9 a.m. in the morning and 9 p.m. This is the time when everybody is moving from one place to other, getting involved in their daily... You would want to be a judge. You can raise your hand. Obviously, you're going to pass out and you're going to be advocates, then after that you could become judges. How many of you are keen to be the presiding officer and judge? Can you raise your hands? Oh my God. How many of you would want to be just advocates and take care of the common man? Okay, what about the rest? Okay, just back. So 67% of the accidents take place between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. That's a very interesting finding because that's the time when there is movement across the roads from both sides. Everybody's in a hurry. And another important aspect was that when they did a study, they found about 78% of the accidents occur because the driver himself. So the knowledge of driving by the drivers is very, very important. They are not only responsible for the problems they are going to face, but also for the other members of the society. And about 3% of the accidents occurred because of the civic body's neglect, or because of some potholes or humps or whatever thing. But the saddest part is that 18 to 34 years, that is late second decade to the early third decade, that was the age group which got affected the maximum. These are the most precious people in the society. They could have been a lawyer, they could have been an engineer, or they could have been a doctor or a good leader. But those are stifled because of somebody else's fault or lack of civic sense amongst them. Once this has happened, those who die, we feel very sad for them. But those who are not, and they are injured or disabled, how do we get them back into the mainstream? That is the question that each one of us have to ask amongst ourselves. So now, if you look at of the 150,000 people who died in the Indian context, if you compare that to a developed country like USA, only about 40,000 people succumbed to the accident in that calendar year. So you could imagine that in our country, there is scope for general population like you and me to educate the common man that they should not get involved into this kind of accidents that will cause them disabled. Getting compensation is one thing, but trying to avoid getting into the situation is most important thing. So this is what you've come across. But we as doctors who treat such patients, we come across this kind of scene every day. This is about a young man whom I operated. He was traveling on a motorbike with two others. Three of them were traveling in a bike and hit a median and had a head injury. If you could see, the entire brain is swollen and it's bulging. And this is how it would look once you operate, once the blood is removed. And at the end of the surgery, this is how it would look. So I am happy that I have removed the blood clot. But what happens to the individual after about 3 months? This is how his scan will look. If you notice, though you're not doctors, you can make out, one half of the brain is functional, other half of the brain is dysfunctional. This man of 22 years survives an accident. He is disabled with paralysis of his limbs, unable to speak, unable to recognize, for a simple mistake of not following the traffic rules. So he is the one who would need compensation to get back into normal life. Similarly, you also come across people like this kind of people. He was a lorry driver who did not have a license, and he borrowed the lorry from one of his other friends when driving and had a head-on collision. You can imagine the impact of the injury for the lack of civic sense. He had such a problem that his brain was exposed, his eyeball was shattered. So I operated on him, and after about 2 days, this is how he looked. It is acceptable for him because he survived, but he has lost in the bargain one eye. He is disabled. He is now a burden for the family and also to the society for a mistake. So these are the kind of people who will come with need for compensation to you. So you need to know the scenario how they land up into. And you also will come across with people who have spine injuries when they're driving in bikes without control. This is how the scenario would be. Or sometimes they can have spinal fractures that can make them disabled. They may probably live, but they will not be able to contribute anything to the society. So these people also need compensation. They end up with this kind of surgeries where you need to put a rod. If it's a youngster, he'll be disabled for life. If it's a lady, she will have problems on her own. So these kind of disabilities will have, their disability has to be quantified and then compensated. So now if you look at it, when you talk about disability, the questions that will come into your mind generally are, how do I come to a conclusion that this man has got a disability? What is the percentage of disability that he has that he needs compensation to be given? When do I quantify the disability? What is the time limit? And why should I consider him as a disabled person? For what benefit he is going to get? These are the common questions each one of us have. So now, if you have to get into this thing, you need to know some basics about why we are dealing with this. Simple thing, I do not go into the depth of the medical things. All of you are aware that the central nervous system consists of the brain, which is the master organ which controls the entire body. Any deformity or any damage to the brain will probably show in the different parts of the body. And the nerves which in the brain are the ones which act like the wires from a main junction which give electricity. Likewise, the nerves carry messages and convey messages so that the brain functions normally. You have something called a brainstem in the neck which controls your breathing, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your pulse. And then there's the spinal cord which controls the movement of your limbs, and then the nerves. Any damage to this causes misery in the form of disability. Once he is disabled, he is differently abled, and he may be able to take care of his daily needs, or he may need assistance financially. Also, mentally also he has to be well taken care of. So this aspect is important to know to gauge the degree of disability. So if you look at brain and such, there are areas in the brain, each one has got a different function. So any damage to that particular person will cause a disability in that area of function. For example, the front portion of the brain, it is important for personality development of a human being, it is important for memory and recall of events, and also some sort of speech. If there is any damage to this area, they will have these kind of disabilities, which we have to quantify what percentage it is and then award him some financial help. Similarly, this area called the temporal lobe is important for speech, for some part of memory, vision, and higher mental functions. Somebody who is educated, who has an injury to this area, his mental functions will get disabled so that he will not be able to recollect or to progress in his profession. And this area is called the parietal lobe, which is important for things like writing, calculating, drawing, going from right side to left side. Somebody who's got injury, he may not even know what are the rooms in his house are. That kind of disabilities they can develop. The back part of the brain is important for vision. All of you know. Whenever there's an injury here, they can have some visual symptoms. And there is a connection between the right and the left brain, which is important to coordinating between the left side of the body and the right side of the body. There are about 12 nerves within the brain. Any injury to them can cause permanent damage. Things like vision, smell, or movement of the eyes, squinting. These are all disabilities which have to be kept in mind. This is the most important part of the brain, which is called the brainstem. It is between the junction of the brain and the spinal cord. In high-speed motor accidents, whenever there is an injury to that area, you see sometimes in the newspaper, he had a massive accident, he died on the spot in a head-on collision. This area, when it gets damaged, they lose their life on the spot. So the compensation for here, it becomes for a compensation for the deceased person. It is not for a disabled person. So that aspect also we have to keep in mind once when you are a person who is fighting for the patient or for the insurance company or as a person who is going to give a judgment regarding compensation. It is this awareness that is important for you in future. So likewise, the spinal cord is important for, as I said, for movement. If it is in the neck spinal cord injury, they'll have paralysis of the hands and the legs. If it is somewhere in the chest region, they'll have only weakness of the legs. If it is in the lower region, they can have loss of control or passing urine, or they'll not have an ability to stand up or walk. These are all, they are alive, but they're of no use to themselves or to the society. They'll become bedridden. These kind of injuries are very devastating and sometimes causes depression among the survivors. The head injury will not occur just because of accidents. You must also know what the other causes. It can be due to fall from a height, or assault, or firearm injuries, or sports-related injuries, or recreation injuries like surfing, or bungee jumping, one of them. But all of them, when they did a survey, they found that is always found between the end of this first to second decade to the third decade. These people get injured more, and as usual, accidents are more common in males than in women. Probably women are safer drivers than men. That's why they don't get so many accidents. And what is a head injury? A head injury involves an encompassment of an injury to the scalp, that is the skin that covers the skull that protects the brain, and the brain itself. Any of these three gets injured, it is quantified as a head injury. So whenever there is an accident and head injury, you always have noticed that the patient is either drowsy, or the individual on the spot of accident is unconscious. So some amount of loss of consciousness is always very common. Then we always look at how we treat these accidents and what are the problems that occur. If there is an accident and there is involvement of the nervous system, there is some problem for his quantity of life and quality of life. If it is a severe injury, he may not be able to survive the onslaught of the injury. If it is a less than severe injury, he will be disabled. He may be alive, but his quality of life is under question. That is where the compensation will help him to come out of the problem. So you can also have sometimes death. So death sometimes occurs immediately at the site of accident, or sometimes it occurs about 2 to 3 hours later because the blood clot gets collected and then causes a problem, or sometimes 2 to 3 weeks later because of various other problems of infection and things like that. Simple words you will hear every time in your legal thing is that concussion. Concussion is a brief injury to the head which causes brief loss of consciousness and then he becomes conscious. Something called contusion is where the brain has moved inside the skull and there is some abrasion of the brain, that is called as contusion. Brain hemorrhage is all known to you. Diffuse brain injury means the entire brain. It is generally seen in elderly people and small children. A small child falls from a cradle, his brain would have shaken, so the entire brain get injured. An elderly person, because he is old, the brain would have shrunk. Inside the skull, the brain will shake. They can have a diffuse brain injury. So these things are serious. As we go from concussion to diffuse, they become more and more serious and sometimes loss of death. Fractures, all of you know that it can occur to any part of the skull. The spinal injuries are sad because the individual is alive but he is disabled. He cannot do his daily routine work. He will need assistance. Sometimes he needs long-term treatment, he needs some physiotherapy, he can't sit for a few minutes. So if it is a desk job with a spine injury, he will need more support, more degree of compensation. If it is a non-desk job, somebody is going to travel with a spinal injury, traveling is going to be a problem. These are things which the victim will project to you saying that I am unable to do those things, so I need more compensation. You have to keep this in mind. So simple X-rays, as you know, simple investigation, X-rays are done, CT scans are done, and MRIs are done. Based on this, the doctor will quantify to you what kind of injury and which area is injured. That will help you to come to a conclusion as to whether it's a severe injury or a non-severe injury. The assessment as such, when we do, it starts with a review of the old records. Instances you will see that there is an accident in, say, in the airport road. He will immediately go for a local hospital for first aid. Then they realize that they don't have the facility there and they ask them to go to a bigger hospital. The transit time from the accident to the going to a higher center is always dangerous because at that time, if there is no oxygen given, there is no care given, they can develop secondary brain damage. A simple injury can become such a serious injury, then become disabled for life. So that has to be kept in mind. Personal history of the patient is important because in addition to the disability that is caused to the accident, he may have a pre-existing disease like chronic diabetes or chronic hypertension, which may be causing further damage to the brain. So your judgment would depend upon the report given by the clinical doctor who has assessed the neurological damages that is caused, and he will give you in the form of a percentage. He will not give you a medical terminology, he will tell you this is the percentage of disability he has got. That will help you as a law officer to decide how much of compensation has to be given. And obviously the follow-up investigations are part of the amount that the patient has to spend. So if you look at the important guidelines given by the Government of India as per the Gazette notification, there are only few steps under which we have to assess. First step is the sensorium of the individual, the victim. If that victim is drowsy, he is not able to understand what you are saying, he is not able to see things around and respond, that means he is in an altered sensorium. All of us are in normal sensorium. We understand what is happening, we respond to what is happening in our environment, we answer questions. As someone who has got a head injury, who is unconscious or not in a fully conscious state, he is called as an altered sensorium. For him, the disability is considered as 100%. So there is no two questions to be asked. Anyone who is not in a normal sense because of the accident, it is a 100% disability. So it will depend upon that to quantify his amount that is to be given to him. The next comes the intellectual disability. This is very important because nowadays people, you equate knowledge to money. If I am trying to give you an idea about a particular project, I may not be investing money, but the very fact that I am giving an idea which is going to make you money is an intellectual investment by me. So someone who is a software engineer or someone who is a big legal advisor, if he has an accident and if his intellectual capacity is lowered, that is catastrophic for him because he would have probably gone up on the ladder. That has to be considered when you are giving a compensation. This is generally assessed by the psychologist. Psychologist will compare a normal IQ, intelligent quotient of a normal person, and examine him with a battery of tests if he is an educated person, and give him gradings of mild, moderate, severe, and very severe disability. So each one has got 25%, 50% similarly. So he will quantify and say he is 75% intellectually disabled. So that is a number which has to be added up And there is a formula for that which I will tell you to come to a conclusion. Next, the subheading under which we need to assess is the speech. Obviously, speech is a very important faculty for anyone who is either educated or not educated, because it is a means of communication with someone. If you are not able to communicate your needs and wants, obviously it is going to be a problem for him to have a normal life. Speech is generally examined by the doctors by giving about 100 words. So you ask him to recollect the words, ask him the meaning of certain words, ask him to comprehend certain words, and then give a percentage how much he is able to answer. If he is a little bit intelligent, you can ask him to repeat the words. You can give him 10 words and then after 10 minutes ask him to recollect the words. So that also helps us to know how good his memory is. And if he has an ability to write, suppose it has got weakness on this side but he has got power here, he can rewrite whatever we have told. So then you come to a conclusion about the degree of speech disability. So this is one more aspect of disability. Next comes the nerves. The limb nerves are not important, the brain nerves are important. There are two types of nerves, some which are important for movement, like eye movement or lip movement, chewing, swallowing. These are very important because these activities can get disabled because of the injury to the brain. And there are certain nerves which look after sensation, taste or touch or pain or something falls into your eyes, you close your eyes, that sensation. These are sensory nerves. So for that, there is a specific amount disability that will be given by the neurologist when he examines. Next, most important is the locomotion or the motor, walking. This is depending upon which or how many numbers of the limbs are paralyzed. If there's only one, it is mono. One limb is paralyzed, it's about 25%. If it is one side is paralyzed, it's about 50%. If all the four limbs is paralyzed, it is 100%. So it's 100% disability. This is again jotted down by the clinical consultant. Next comes the sensations. In sensations, we have loss of sensations or sometimes abnormal sensations. They say that it's a burning sensation, tingling sounds. This also is quantified with 10% for the loss of sensation, for 25% for the abnormal sensations. Abnormal sensations are very unpleasant. They cannot sleep, they cannot work. So that is given more weightage. Similarly, the injury to the brain and the spinal cord will cause certain functions to be disabled. The bladder function or bowel movements are controlled by the brain and the spinal cord. Any injury, a high-speed injury, a motorbike injury, if there's an injury to the neck, they will always have a problem in controlling or passing urine and the stools. That is a very, very important, psychologically devastating for someone. Even if he improves in his limbs, but if he has no control over his urine in public, if he passes, is a very embarrassing thing. So that has also been considered as a very important disability. So that has quantified like number of times he has that problem or how urgently he has to go to the bathroom or the restroom. That is quantified because it is a very social aspect that is taken into consideration. Sometimes they have epilepsy or fits. This is a very devastating thing, what we call as traumatic epilepsy. After the accident, he will be fully conscious, but he will go back to work, say the bank manager or somebody. Suddenly, due to stress, he starts throwing a fit. That is very, very devastating. For that also, there are guidelines where we have to, how we have to give the percentage of thing. This gives you different kinds of disabilities. Last but not the least is the walking or the balancing. If a person is not able to move from one place to another place, he is going to be bedridden. For that also there is disability scores which the clinician will attribute to the percentage. And once he is done with this, he will make an assessment as to totally how much is the percentage by a formula given by the government of India. So where do you fit into this thing? You could probably, as I said, after you pass out, you could become a junior advocate, type to somebody senior and eminent like your professor, work under his office, to learn the nitty-gritty of the law. Or sometimes you can become, over a period of time, a senior advocate yourself, who would probably represent the victim who has got an accident. Or you could be an advocate for an insurance company, preventing the victim from getting compensation. Or sometimes you could be part of a court commission, which asks you to go along with the other advocate to a doctor who is very busy, he cannot come, so you take reports from him about the degree of disability. Or, God willing, you could become a judge and you could be sitting there at the high table deciding how much of compensation you have to give to the victim. These are the roles you have to play in your future career. So knowing this, you need to know why and how you come across this disability assessment. You come across, I'm sure with your other subjects, there are so many claims nowadays everybody has. It could be matrimonial claims, it could be property claims, it could be insurance claims, or sometimes even health claims. Of late, the accident claims have become very, very, huge number, which people are asking for claims depending upon how well they were entrenched in their career, because that has to be compensated. So this accident claims is itself a very important aspect in your practice. So the accident, what is an accident claim? It's a claim of right with respect to accident caused due to act of negligence of another person. So if a person has caused an accident, he is liable to compensate the person who has been suffering from that thing. This is the basis of the accident claim. So how did this come? In the English law, I'm sure your teachers would have told you. Any person or a legal representative of the person who has lost his life because of an accident or caused due to a negligence can institute criminal proceedings against that person and at the same time also ask for compensation from it. So that is the basis for this. This is called the law of the torts. So what is a tort? I'm sure you know about it. In common law, it is a civil wrong, not a criminal wrong. It is a civil wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir. Civil wrong that causes a person who claims to suffer loss or harm resulting in legal liability for the person who has committed the tortious act. Causing an accident is a tortious act. Because of his act, someone else has been hurt or damaged or probably lost his life. So he has the right to claim the compensation from the person who caused it. That is the basis for someone asking for compensation. Considering all this, way back as into almost in the 1885 or so, there was the Fatal Accidents Act. At that time, the act gave provision for the procedure to be followed to ask for compensation, and it allowed the person who is surviving or the legal heirs to claim for compensation from the person who is committing the negligence. But the insurance giving the thing or the state trying to give an award was not at that time a part of the law. But however, as late as recently, the Motor Vehicle Act has been amended where there is provision for interim award of compensation. So you are aware that in our setup that the law takes its course because law has its own way of dealing with things. The person who is disabled probably cannot wait till the trial is ended. By that time, all his hopes and aspirations would have gone. So in the interim period, for him to survive and for him to take care of his needs, there is a compensation that can be awarded. That has helped the accident claims to be taken seriously, and then someone is going to benefit with that. So when you sit there and try to assess the compensation, you cannot value somebody's life with amount of money. I mean, I cannot say this person's life is worth $2 million or 50 lakhs because it's priceless. This is a one-time gift given by God. But at the same time, we cannot, if he has lost a limb, we cannot quantify the amount saying that his limb is worth so many lakhs of rupees. This, even the court accepts it. The court only can give you some compensation and some monetary benefit, whatever is possible, but it cannot attempt to give a perfect compensation because there is no thing called a perfect compensation. So, considering all these things, whenever a court or a tribunal is going to fix the amount of compensation, there is some amount of guesswork that it could be so much. There is some amount of sympathy that this man has gone through such a hardship, he needs some monetary help. And there is a hypothetical consideration. Maybe he will live for 70 years. Maybe he will live for 60 years. So a degree of hypothetical thinking, degree of sympathy is added to give to the compensation. But none of this is done with a malice or with a bad intent. After all, the law has got its heart. It knows who deserves and who doesn't deserve. So this is the basis when you do the compensation. Who can claim the compensation? If a person is survived the accident and injured, he has the first right to claim the compensation. If he has not survived, obviously his legal heirs have the right to seek the compensation. So There are two steps whenever a person is dead following an accident. The step one is, you need to find out the income of the person who has lost his life at that time. Once the income is known, you have to deduct some amount of money which he would have probably used for his daily needs and daily way of life. Whatever amount is remaining is probably the amount he would have saved to take care of his wife and children and so on. So that is like a multiplicand. Keep that aside. And the step two is, you have to look at the age of the person who was dead. So he is dead at 35 years. He could have been in the service for another 30 years or 25 years. So that is taken into consideration, and that is multiplied with this, and a lump sum is created, say 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs something. That, in addition to what the court feels, is given as a compensation. So step one is to find out what his earning at that time is, and deduct for whatever he had is going to be using, and the remaining thing, whatever is there, is a multiplicand, and it's multiplied by the number of years. And it's not as simple as I say that. It's the learned judge who knows how to do it at that time. Okay, so that would give him the compensation there. So what are the, you also have to assess the damages that is caused. There are two things. One is the pecuniary damages and the special or the general damages. The pecuniary damages are the ones which the person spends for, his medical treatment, some surgery is done, or some very costly injection has been given, transportation from to and fro from the house along with his family members, or special diet that was ordered, or some injection which was brought from, say, Singapore and given, something, they're all added up. And in addition to this, what is the amount he has lost for not being able to go to work during the trial, and what amount he would have earned in future if everything was fine. So that has to be considered. And another one is a non-pecuniary damage, which is the general ones. This we cannot quantify so easily, because this is for the mental and physical agony the person goes through following an accident, either due to the surgery or due to the accident itself. All this pain, for that also you need to give the damages. So this could be, because of this, he probably did not lead a life which he was dreaming or which he was planning. That has to be taken in account when you come to a conclusion of the compensation. So now the question is, why should you even give a compensation? You can't just say that every accident victim will get so much, everybody with a motor or two-wheeler will get so much, we could have done it. We cannot do that, because the person who is disabled or who is unable to take care of daily needs will probably need compensation either monetarily or also in a non-monetary way. What is a non-monetary ways? He probably need concession to travel by air. He probably will need concession to travel by train, or probably he needs some reservation of a job, or he wants to get into a professional course, or he wants to take a loan to do some job on his own so that he'll be self-employed. And the benefits are, as I said, so many social benefits which the government has as per the social programs they have. Universally, they all sat together, the experts, and decided we cannot do disabilities for every organ or every part of the body. What is important to get him to work is important. So under 5 headings they decided, if there is a visual disability, vision is important for everyone to be part of the environment. Without vision, it is extremely difficult for them to do their work. Next, locomotor means movement. If you're not able to move from place A to place B, working is going to be difficult and taking care is going to be difficult. Even within the house, if he has to move from the first floor to second floor, if he's not able to move, it's going to be difficult. Third, speech and hearing. If I'm not able to speak, if I'm not able to hear, is that the thing? How do you get this? Okay. So if you're not able to speak and if not able to hear, it's going to be difficult for you to be a part of the society where you have to function. Mental retardation means the intellectual capacity. If you are, as I said, a bank manager who is in charge of the finances, if he is unable to comprehend, he would cause a lot of problems for the banking and for the public. These headings were decided by the government to come to a conclusion that if there is any disability in these aspects, he should be considered as a person who needs compensation. That was the basis for the compensation. So now, when you assess the disabilities, we don't assess the disease, we assess the effect of the accident. You have to keep that in mind. And any assessment should be done only after 6 months after the accident. Because suppose there is an accident today and he was unconscious, because of the treatment that is available in our country at present, he may improve to normal level, so as a part of the treatment. So he does not deserve to be given a compensation. If in spite of 6 months of treatment and waiting period, if he still has got a disability, then he has to be given an apt compensation. That is the basis. And all these guidelines are important only for the brain and the spinal cord, not for other parts of the body. As per the Act, there should be a medical board. And this medical board should have 3 members. One of them should be from the specialty in which a person has got a disability. The standard guidelines, as I told you, has to be followed in principle. The 2 types of disabilities can be given, temporary and permanent. Temporary is only for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, if he is able to come back to normal social functions, then the compensation stops there. If it's a permanent disability, huge quantum of compensation can be given to them. Finally, this is what I want to tell you, it's a very important one. You should know that there will be multiple disabilities. Speech may be 25%, paralysis may be 75%, hearing may be 30%. So you don't just add 25 plus 35 plus 75 until 120%. Disability it has to be less than 100%, 100 or 100, less than 100%. There is a formula given by the Government of India. This formula you must remember, A plus B into 100 minus A by 100. A is the highest disability. Suppose he has a disability of paralysis of 75%. B is the least. He's got a hearing disability of 10%. This formula has to be kept in mind and used to come to a conclusion where the disability will be generally less than 100%. This will be the basis for giving compensations and for giving any monetary benefit to any individual who has got a neurological problem following an accident. So this, in effect, is how we come to a conclusion. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I will try to explain it.
Sir, what about the cases of neuroshock?
Okay.
Suppose he might not have suffered any injuries, but by seeing the accident, he might have suffered some shock.
Yeah. We have 2 kinds of shock. One is the brain shock. Another one is the spinal shock. A very important aspect what you raised. There are times when, because of the impact of the injury and because of the scare, he goes into something like a shock where he doesn't respond for some time. Generally, by 2 hours, once the blood flow to the brain is normalized, they will wake up. They will wake up and they will start recognizing things. There is a term called amnesia, forgetfulness. He might forget the accident, but over a period of time he will become conscious. Now, these kind of people develop what is called as a post-concussion syndrome. The CT scan, if you do, will be normal. He will not have bodily any injuries, but he will be in a state of a shock where he is not normal. That aspect has to be taken care of when you do the assessment of speech. Is he able to speak properly? Is his IQ normal? That disability is going to be given there. The problem when this kind of things happens is that the scan is being normal, the doctor says it is normal, and you go back to work and the person in the work says that the reports are normal, you come back to work. They will have symptoms which nobody can understand, things like lack of concentration, mild giddiness, headache, getting angry for small things, mood changes,